We're at the Department of Psychology at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom, and today we are joined by an alcohol and addiction specialist by the name of Professor David Belin. And Professor Belin is a professor of Behavioral Neuroscience and is a specialist in impulsive compulsive disorders such as alcohol and drug addiction, stress and anxiety. Professor, I always giggle to myself a little bit when I hear it's drug and alcohol addiction, because isn't alcohol actually a drug?
Alcohol is a drug, and interestingly enough, the brain doesn't really care about the legal status of drugs. So if you smoke nicotine, or if you take alcohol, if you take cocaine, all of these drugs will have a very similar effect on a particular system in the brain called the dopamine system. They all share the property of hijacking that system and artificially increasing the levels of dopamine. So the brain does not know that alcohol is a legal drug in many societies. It only understands that alcohol interferes with its biochemical systems.
Mm. I'm going to be asking you some questions today about the term alcoholic and alcoholism. And it's my understanding that those terms don't exist today. I mean, I know that they've existed over many years and decades. Of course, we have Alcoholics Anonymous. But we were speaking before we hit record here, and you were sharing that in actual fact, an alcoholic or an alcoholism rather, is no longer used in clinical medicine. Is that correct? Can you just explain that?
It's no longer used in clinical medicine. It's no longer used in research either. We now refer to someone with a substance use disorder or someone with an alcohol use disorder. The reason being that there's still a lot of stigma around these psychiatric conditions. These are psychiatric conditions, and qualifying someone as an alcoholic puts a lot of impetus on the fact that this individual is its diagnosis, whereas someone with a alcohol use disorder is someone with a particular brain disorder. And that is intended to remediate or at least decrease this profound stigma that still exists around these disorders.
So does that mean there are millions of people walking around mistakenly self-identifying as an alcoholic?
Well, they identify as someone with an alcohol use disorder, which 10 years ago, 6 years ago, was referred to as alcoholism. So the disease has not changed, the disorder has not changed. The brain mechanisms of alcohol use disorder are the same as those of what we would refer to as alcoholism. It is the way we refer to the condition that has changed. Yeah.
I noticed that you corrected yourself there. You initially referred to it as a disease, and then you changed just what you said to a disorder. Why is that?
Because the notion of a disease is always controversial when one discusses psychiatric conditions, because the issue with psychiatric conditions as of today is that we still lack understanding of these conditions, or at least the biological foundations of these conditions, to be able to make a measurement of the individual and say this is a diagnosis. The diagnosis, which is offered or given by a psychiatrist, defines the condition. So if I have a diagnosis of having alcohol use disorder, I have alcohol use disorder in the absence of any biological marker of me having that disorder. You can't give a diagnosis of cancer in the absence of any biological marker. So these are disorders because as of today, in 2024, we still understand at the end very little about the biological basis of these disorders. And they represent a constellation of alterations in a large variety of systems in the brain that makes them disorders more than a particular disease.
So let's start by defining what is an alcohol use disorder and what is not an alcohol use disorder.
An alcohol use disorder is an interaction with alcohol that results in the individual suffering from it, or the relative or friends or siblings of that individual suffering from use. So in the current clinical practice, there would be 10 criteria that would define alcohol use disorder. One individual would have to meet at least 2 of these 10 criteria over a period of 12 months to be deemed having an alcohol use disorder. And then there can be different severities attached to these diagnoses, with mild, moderate, and severe. So someone with 2 criteria would have a mild alcohol use disorder. From, let me tell you, from 4 to 5 symptoms, they would have a moderate alcohol use disorder, and anywhere between 6 and more symptoms, it would be a severe alcohol use disorder.
So give me 2 examples of what's on that 10 list criteria, because I would submit that most drinkers, most, let's call them socially acceptable drinkers in the world, probably have a mild form of an alcohol use disorder. At least that would be my submission. But read out a few. And by the way, these 10 criteria is from the American Psychiatric Association, is that
Absolutely, right? Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So read out, actually, don't just read out 2, read out like all 10.
Yeah.
So we can identify.
So the kind of questionnaire you would have is the patient at times when you end up drinking more or longer than you intended, more than once wanted to cut down or stop drinking or tried but couldn't, spent a lot of time drinking or being sick or getting over other after effects, wanted a drink so badly you couldn't think of anything else. You found that drinking or being sick from drinking often interfered with taking care of your home or family, or caused job troubles or school problems. Continued to drink even though it was causing trouble with your family or friends. Given up or cut back on activities that were important or interesting to you, or gave you pleasure in order to drink. More than once gotten into situations while or after drinking that increased your chances of getting hurt, such as driving, swimming, using machinery, walking in a dangerous area, or having unsafe sex. Continued to drink even though it was making you feel depressed or anxious, or adding to another health problem, or after having had a memory blackout. Had to drink much more than you once did to get the effect you want, or found that your usual number of drinks had much less effect than before. Found that when the effects of alcohol were wearing off, you had withdrawal symptoms such as trouble sleeping, shakiness, restlessness, nausea, sweating, a racing heart, or a seizure. So these are the various criteria. And if I may, I would argue that I don't think it is the case that most of the social drinkers would have a diagnosis of mild AUD.
Maybe you haven't hung out with a lot of my friends from high school back in the day, Professor, because, I mean, and also because of the line of work that I choose, I am surrounded by people who are trying to have a better relationship with alcohol. And so I hear these 10 criteria going on all the time. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because drinking to a blackout, or drinking and that you regret things afterwards, or drinking that it affects other people, I don't know. I mean, I'm hypothesizing, of course, but I would have thought most drinkers in today's society would be at least 2 of those people on that 10 list criteria.
It may well be the case that they've done it once and they regret and they don't again. The issue with alcohol use disorder is that it's recurrent. So they keep doing it. And this is where there's a big difference between going beyond what you should have drunk and doing it repeatedly and losing control over your behavior so that it persists despite your awareness that you shouldn't do it, that it's bad for you. You continue doing it. And that's the compulsive nature of alcohol use disorder. You just can't not do it.
Yeah. Let's dig into the science now. What is actually happening to the brain when we consume alcohol? What happens to the body? Like, what are the effects of drinking what I refer to as attractively packaged poison?
Well, many effects. We will not have time, unfortunately, to discuss them all. I've already mentioned the fact that alcohol, like any other drugs, may they be legal or illegal, is going to result in a profound increase in the release of a new chemical in the brain called dopamine. Dopamine is often mistaken for the pleasure hormone. It's not that at all. It's a neurotransmitter that is associated with pleasure, but also associated with pain. It helps the brain learn about circumstances in which we experience pleasure or we experience pain, so that we can seek out the circumstances in which we experience pleasure and we can avoid those in which we experience pain. So it is a profound teaching signal in the brain, all about seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. By itself, it does not mediate pleasure or pain. That is more the job of what is called the endogenous opiate system, which is the system that is directly targeted by drugs such as heroin. Interestingly enough, alcohol has the dirtiest effects of all drugs. It can interfere with that same system that I've just referred to, the endogenous opiate system, indirectly. It will have an effect on the on system in the brain called the glutamatergic system. It will have an effect on the stop system in the brain called the GABAergic system. Many people experience these calming, relaxing, anxiolytic properties of alcohol. These are the properties of alcohol that are mediated by this stop system. Alcohol can trigger dissociations, alterations in memory. That would be its effect on the on system in the brain. And then there's the motivational effect of alcohol, which will be related to its effect on the dopamine system. So other drugs, such as cocaine or heroin or nicotine, they have one target in the brain. Alcohol has many. And we still don't quite understand how its various effects on these different systems add up to produce, in some individuals and not others, a state that will eventually lead to the loss of control over use that is going to give rise to an alcohol use disorder. We still don't quite understand how that works.
So if alcohol is having 3, 4, 5 times more negative consequences than heroin or cocaine, as if I'm understanding you correctly, is it fair to say that alcohol is the dirtiest, nastiest drug there is?
So I would not say it has more negative effects. I would say it has a more complex interaction with the brain and the body than other drugs. It is indeed a very nasty drug. Alcohol results in dehydration. It does interfere with metabolism in your liver, which in the long run can lead to cirrhosis and liver disease. Alcohol is indeed a very dangerous drug, yes.
Yet society glorifies this very dangerous drug.
Yeah, and I'm not here to make, to support any use of any drug of any kind, but interestingly enough, as far as we can go back in history, there has not been ever a human society without any drug. So for as long as there's been agriculture, more than 100 people, there's been art and there's been drugs. There's been religion and there's been drugs. Alcohol has been there almost from the very beginning. I'm not saying that justifies the use of it, but it may well be the case that at the level of a highly social species as we are, alcohol may well have been used to cope with the pressure of social interactions. There are some theories of evolution that suggest that we are as intelligent as we are because of our reliance as a species on social interactions. And it is very difficult to understand a peer's intentions, and communication is one of the most difficult cognitive functions there are. It may well be the case that drugs have been used at some point to kind of smoothen out individual interactions when we interact with multiple individuals. I'm not at all suggesting that we should drink alcohol, but there's no evidence of any society ever that didn't use drugs.
As a behavioral neuroscientist and someone who's studied impulsive and compulsive disorders, and I would surmise someone who watches television or films or movies, or you participate in society, and so you see this glorification of alcohol that I'm referring to. We see beer companies sponsoring sporting teams. We see Heineken advertising the Champions League soccer championships, and it's everywhere. Do you have your own personal view on whether alcohol is fundamentally bad or it can be fundamentally okay? I understand that we're having this conversation through the lens of you're a neuroscientist, but do you have your own personal views on alcohol and its use?
Yes, but I would have some reserves as to sharing them, actually. I would say it's the exact same thing as, is sugar bad? Or is junk food bad? Yes, of course, sugar and junk food are not healthy. Do I have a Big Mac from time to time? Yes, I do. Do I like sugar? Yes, I do. But that's me. Life kills. Anything that can have a potential risk when we interact with it is potentially dangerous. The problem with drugs, as it is the case with junk food, is that we still cannot predict how dangerous the interaction with the substance is for a particular individual. So, from one culture to another, I'm French, I can't really hide my accent. I love wine. But since I started drinking alcohol, I would have rather saved money. I would have bought a nice bottle of wine and I would have had that as a sensory experience with friends. I've never had alcohol, for instance, to get drunk. That never was the purpose. I don't mean to be patronizing. I'm referring to my own personal history. Alcohol is part of my sensory experiences when I have nice cheese or nice bread. And I've never been looking for the effects of it. It's the taste that matters to me. For someone else, alcohol is something that they don't like, as simple as that. And others, they don't like the taste, but they like the effects. And depending on the reasons why you drink and the way your brain is made up, we are all very different, much more different in there than we are in here. One cannot predict today whether you may well be vulnerable to losing control over that behavior. And that is about alcohol, it's about gambling, it's about junk food, it's about use of any drugs or any stimulus that arouses you. And because we are not able yet to tell someone, if you engage in this particular behavior, you may develop a debilitating, profoundly hurtful and difficult condition, I would say, yes, it's unsafe. Simply because I cannot help individuals know whether it is safe for them or not.
In your research, is it obvious why some people are more prone to an alcohol use disorder compared with others?
So it is not quite obvious yet. We're getting there, hopefully. Interestingly enough, the field of research on drug addiction for the first 70 years was focusing on trying to understand how the brain responds to drugs. And I could tell you a lot about that. But interestingly enough, if I drink alcohol right now, that will change my brain. But it will tell you nothing about how alcohol changes the brain of someone who will develop an alcohol use disorder, because I have not developed an alcohol use disorder. And it's only been since the early 21st century, 2004 and so forth, that the notion of individual vulnerability to developing substance use disorders and alcohol use disorder has really emerged. And we are in the infancy of understanding the notion of individual trajectories in the development of these disorders. I initially, very naively, started my career working on these notions. What makes individuals vulnerable to developing substance use disorders and alcohol use disorder? Thinking this vulnerability was wired in the brain of the individual. So if I could observe individuals before they develop the disorder, and once they've developed the disorder, and I can compare them to individuals who would not develop the disorder, having been exposed to alcohol the same way or to cooking the same way, I could, in a subtraction, identify what's different in between these individuals. Except my world went completely upside down during COVID. And my theoretical understanding of the vulnerability to developing alcohol use disorder or substance use disorder has profoundly changed then. So you would tell me it's only 4 years ago, but yes. Because I then realized that actually many people who would not have experienced the consequences of the pandemic, such as social isolation and anxiety around potentially losing your job and all the lockdowns may well have never developed an alcohol use disorder. What we observed during COVID was a surge in admissions at A&E for alcohol-related problems and a surge in the diagnosis of alcohol use disorders, accompanied with a surge in relapse to alcohol use disorder in individuals who had maintained abstinence for a pretty long period of time. Why? Why would that happen? Well, the country in which I live, there is a culture around having a beer in a pub and enjoying time with your mates, as you would say, and it is also a society where it's not necessarily valued to share your emotions or to show your emotions. To some extent, alcohol is there as a social tool to facilitate human interactions late in the evening when you can let the steam off a little bit, and you do that with your friends in a particular environment. And some individuals may well have done that for 25 years, and they stick to using alcohol in this context, and alcohol has not permeated other aspects of their life, so they do not have an alcohol use disorder. And all of a sudden, these individuals start drinking at home, not to spend time with their friends, not to share their emotions, but to medicate anxiety, to medicate a loss of social interactions, a loss of cognitive interactions. And all of a sudden, the same alcohol now interferes with a part of the brain that lights up when you're anxious, lights up when you feel bad. And this part of the brain was not online when these individuals were having a beer with their friends at the pub. And all of a sudden you realize that the vulnerability is not set in stone. It is dynamic. It depends on the psychoaffective state of the individual when they take the drug. Why is it I take alcohol now may well be far more important than how much alcohol I drink now with regards to whether I'm going to develop an alcohol use disorder afterwards.
So as another way of saying that, there is a difference between a sad drinker, as in a drinker who's feeling sad or isolated, such as in COVID lockdowns, and a happy drinker, which is someone who isn't isolated, seemingly doesn't have many pressures going on in their life and is drinking just for the pure pleasure of life.
Yeah, there is. I'm not saying that it's safe to drink alcohol if you are enjoying your time with your friends. That's not what I'm saying. But research clearly demonstrates that alcohol does very poorly alongside stress. So if you are stressed and you drink alcohol, stress is going to exacerbate some of the effects of alcohol, and stress opens the gate for alcohol to interfere with parts of the brain that are not accessible to alcohol when you're not stressed. So alcohol has a more pervasive and profound effect on the brain if you drink when you're sad than if you drink when you're not sad. It happens as well that the more you drink, the more when you do not have alcohol, you'll be sad, because chronic exposure to alcohol, as for all drugs, recruits the stress system in the brain. So some people can make themselves sad by using too much alcohol, and then they'll be using alcohol to try to medicate the fact that they're sad. And this is a vicious cycle from which it is very difficult to escape.
Yet, in popular culture, on television, in movies, we always see the stressed person at the end of the day pour themselves a drink as if the drink is somehow relieving them of that stress. But in actual fact, from a psychological point of view, from your research, that behavior of drinking to relieve stress and anxiety is simply prolonging stress and anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. It may well have a very acute effect that would be welcomed by the user at the time they take alcohol. But first of all, that opens the door to the development of alcoholic disorder in the long run, and that promotes more stress afterwards. So, and it's not just in advertisements, very popular singers right now, in their movie clips, in their songs, there's a lot of, I'm drinking alcohol when I'm sad, I'm medicating with alcohol. That is a very bad message to send, because that's one of the worst ways, the worst reasons to take alcohol. The factor what we know is biggest determinant of the development of an alcohol use disorder is age of onset. The earlier you use, the more likely you'll be to developing addiction. Because if you start drinking alcohol in your teens, alcohol will interfere with all the brain while the brain matures during adolescence. It's a period where all the brain changes. To some extent, the brain during adolescence is as open to alcohol as it is in an adult when you're sad.
You know, I'm seeing these Hollywood celebrities, The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, George Clooney, Ryan Reynolds. George Clooney had $1 billion brand of tequila. The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, who I referenced, has a tequila brand. And Ryan Reynolds, a very famous Canadian actor who stars in Marvel movies, has aviation gin. And I'm seeing them promoting alcohol. Now, they're promoting alcohol in a happy way, not as in drink this if you're sad and depressed. So if I'm understanding you correctly, the worst time to drink is when we're sad, and the not as bad time to drink is when we're happy. So can I really be critical of these Hollywood celebrities for putting a positive spin on alcohol use?
I would say so. Yes, I would say yes. The reason is that if someone has experienced the effects of alcohol when they're happy, but they are used to be drinking alcohol, they are much more likely to resort to using alcohol when they're sad. Because you may use alcohol regularly, it becomes part of your behavioral repertoire. So promoting alcohol does not come alongside a clear educational perspective on why alcohol is dangerous. Because alcohol is dangerous. Irrespective of why you drink, it's dangerous because you do not know whether you are vulnerable to its effects. And I hope I did not convey the notion that no one develops alcohol use disorder if they drink a lot in happy places. No, if you drink a lot of alcohol, you are very likely to developing alcohol use disorder anyway. It's just that the quantity is not all that matters. It's the reason why you drink alcohol. So you need alcohol and you need a reason to promote alcohol use disorder, faster or not, but it's never safe to drink a lot of alcohol. So any message that promotes the use of alcohol, and especially suggests that alcohol becomes a social norm in a way to enjoy time. Alcohol can be an accessory that one can use perhaps to exemplify a personal experience. It should never be a necessary component of any experience of a joyful moment in your life. Life is not necessarily requiring alcohol for it to be happy. And individuals don't need that. So I think it's still dangerous to promote alcohol, yes.
What psychological state are we in when we drink modest amounts of alcohol, and what psychological state are we in when we drink excessive amounts of alcohol?
So there are different levels of modest amount. Early on, there will be a bit of anxiolysis, so we feel less anxious. That's the reason why some people would resort to alcohol when they feel bad. Then we're a bit disinhibited. Then when we start drinking much more, we become numb. And it may well be the state that individuals with a alcohol use disorder or some substance use disorder are looking for, being numb, when my own personal history, my current feelings, my current experiences are difficult to bear. Well, being numb is the solution. And drinking a lot of alcohol is giving me that state. And that is perpetuating then the states in which these individuals find themselves. Like, I feel bad, I feel stressed, I feel sometimes guilty. Alcohol becomes the only solution.
In that scenario, we're stressed, we're anxious, we drink alcohol. Are we essentially sedating ourselves?
To some extent, yes. So, self-medication is, in that particular case, a form of sedation. So, and there's another aspect that I have not yet touched upon, which is the fact that drugs such as alcohol are also capable of facilitating the development of habits. And so they may by chronic use facilitates the fact that it's becoming part of my daily life to drink. And I can eventually end up drinking for no reason at all, because that's what I do. And in this particular case, irrespective of my particular internal state, I feel, because that's what I do, I keep doing it. And irrespective of what comes my way, if that's what I do, I keep doing it. So the ability of drugs, and alcohol is not the only one, every single drug of abuse that we've tested promotes the formation of habits. That contributes to the perpetuation of the behavior irrespective of what comes your way. And you no longer need any explanation as to why you use it. You use it because you use it.
Yeah, and I guess that's built up over generations, isn't it? I mean, if you're a young child and you're watching your mother and father drink alcohol and they're just doing it because they've always done it, then you're likely going to mirror that behavior as you turn into a teenager and later an adult, and you're just going to start drinking because that's what your parents did, that's what your friends are doing, that's what society is glorifying.
That's what
you just drink because you drink.
Absolutely. To some extent, you've just touched upon something that is very important, and just very quickly, it may well be one of the reasons why smoking is so addictive. If you ask a child, how do you take cocaine? They can't really tell you. If you ask any child, how do you smoke? They would. How do you drink alcohol? Well, you drink alcohol the way you drink water. It's a behavior that is hardwired, necessary for survival. So there's no real behavioral modality that is restricted to the consumption of alcohol, right? Smoking is very, very different. And the way I understand how memories are preformed, you've just said you see your parents do it. Yes, children, they see the environment do it. They've acquired the habit long before they start taking the drug. And it may well be the case that in 10 years from now, because you hardly see anyone smoking on TV, on films, on anything, children may not be able to describe how you smoke. And I would predict that then there will be a decrease in the incidence of drug use, nicotine use, for that matter. Alcohol, it's hardwired. The way we interact with the drug is natural. Right? We drink water, we drink alcohol, and alcohol is just another liquid. So to some extent, what it is not specific to us consuming a drug. It is just drinking. So in the way we represent the behavior, well, it's natural. And society must address that.
I've been saying publicly for some time now that my prediction is that in 2 or 3 decades, 20 to 30 years, we as a society will look upon drinking alcohol with the same level of disdain we currently do smoking cigarettes. From your research, from your experience, from what you've seen, are we witnessing a cultural change now in society's perceptions, acceptance of alcohol? Do you subscribe to my hypotheses that in 20 to 30 years from now, society will have turned its back mostly on alcohol?
I wish I could share your optimism. I do not know. The reason why I do not know is, first of all, the disdain with which we look at smoking is very much an Occidental view. If you go to East Asia, smoking remains very, very prominent. And the consequences of smoking remains very prominent. Alcohol, I guess there's a profound increase. When I say profound, it's because it's profound at the societal level, at the public health level, and at the individual personal level. There's a massive increase in alcohol-free drinks, which there are chateaus in Bordeaux that produce very good Bordeaux wine that is alcohol-free, and that is even more expensive than the actual real wine. To some extent, that suggests that perhaps, yes, people are going to learn to interact with the product for the sensory experience, not the psycho psychotropic effect of the substance. But let's have a look back at cigarettes. The fact that society, especially in the UK, there's a profound decrease in that behavior, smoking cigarettes, but hasn't the use of e-cigarettes made up for it? And I think these are still early days, and I do not know. But could the use of e-cigarettes be more of a gateway for smoking later on in life, especially with flavors and access, in children to this kind of product? I am still not quite sure what you think about it.
I want to read you from a press article that came out just today in the San Francisco Chronicle, and the headline is "California Wine is in Serious Trouble." And it talks about how no single factor is responsible for Californian wine's present predicament. Millennials and Gen Zers aren't drinking as much alcohol as older generations. Hard seltzer and canned cocktails have stolen market share. And the current medical consensus suggests that alcohol is unequivocally bad for human health. And apparently, according to this article, beer and spirit sales are struggling too. What's your view on that?
Yeah, that's not something that only affects Californian wine. It's something that you find all across Europe as well. The younger generations seem to be healthier in average than even my generation. I'm 45, and clearly the one before us. I hope that this is representative of an increased awareness of the consequences of engaging in unhealthy behaviors. And yes, alcohol use is unhealthy. Eating junk food is unhealthy. Not doing exercising is unhealthy. And the newer generations have a different approach to life than my generation had. And that also applies to the way the new generations approach their work. They may well be less workaholics in the new generations than they were in my generation. So I think these are very good signs that overall, as a species, we are progressively learning to move away from behaviors that are detrimental to the individual.
This notion that people are simply too weak to stop drinking alcohol, I see this all the time on social media. I hear it amongst my friends. They all say, you know how you stop drinking alcohol? You just stop drinking alcohol. And the inference is that people who can't stop are just too weak. What's your view on that?
So this is what affects me emotionally, simply because it is one of the deep roots of the stigma that individuals with substance use disorder and alcohol use disorder suffer from. Willpower has nothing to do with substance use disorder. As we've just discussed, drugs interfere with the brain, and they produce urges and they produce memories over which we have no control. And they actually even weaken the part of the brain that is responsible for inhibition, the prefrontal cortex. Someone with a substance use disorder is someone who has lost the freedom to stop. It's not that they can't decide to stop. It's not that they have a lack of willpower. They've simply lost the ability to do so. Because drugs facilitate habits, so you keep doing it. Because drugs produce these aberrant learning mechanisms, which is the drug is the only solution to my problems. The drug is the only thing that actually makes me feel something. How can you stop something that is overwhelming? So it is not a problem of willpower, and it is always easy for someone who does not know what it is to not be able to not be strong enough, if that is how they think about it, to stop something. It's not a matter of strength. It's a matter of most of the mechanisms in the brain that drugs produce escape awareness and consciousness. So you cannot stop something that you don't see. So it's not a matter of strength. And that's the reason why we've changed the way we refer to individuals with these disorders because they are not defined by their condition. They're having a condition. It's a brain condition. Someone once said it's a brain disease, and yes, it is a brain disease, even though we've already discussed the limitations of the word disease. And society must change the way we perceive substance use disorder. But as a matter of fact, this stigma is not restricted to substance use disorders. Someone with depression is deemed too weak to cope with stress. As a matter of fact, if there were several people in this room, if I said I'm the heaviest, no one would challenge me. This is what I look like. If I say you are by far the smartest, some people will feel offended. We are not yet willing to accept that there are many more differences in there than those we are willing to accept because we can see them. And these differences, for as long as we haven't understood them, we can't actually show them to the wider society. There will remain stigma around individual vulnerabilities to psychiatric disorders. It's not just about substance use disorders.